Yeah, good morning. Hi. So, notoriety, interesting use of words. So we are notorious, apparently. So Whitestein Technologies, we are an IBPMS vendor, as Gartner has recharacterized the BPMS segment. We're based in Zurich, Switzerland. We've been in this business of BPM for about 4 to 5 years now, and we have a product on the market that performs most of what you would expect of a classic BPMS, but we have some extensions that we've created, which we believe are useful for a whole variety of different process types. And the one I want to talk about today specifically is goals. This concept of goals inside the process structure and how they can be used to structure new forms of processes above classic BPMN. So I should point out in advance, for the first time I decided to try using this Prezi system to do the presentation rather than PowerPoint. After deciding that, I understood that some people can get seasick from watching it. So I have some plastic bags under here if anyone feels a little queasy. The first point I want to make is what are we talking about with this concept of continuum? And what I've effectively done here is taken Sandy Kemsley's view on the process continuum from structured through structured with flexible extensions, adaptive with partial structure and adaptive, and put them on a Möbius loop. The point being here that there is a continuum of relationships between these process types. I don't believe that there are BPM is one thing, ACM is another. They are really a continuous flow of different process types. And the argument that we have with goal-oriented processes that you'll see is that they can be applied, this concept of goals, to all forms of processes across the continuum. And that helps bind together value chains where those value chains consist of different process types. So even if you've got some structured processes, some adaptive processes, this concept of goals as a guiding governance relationship can help connect all of those process types and multiple different process instances across value chains. Now, what I'm going to show you is some process structures, goal-based process structures in the tool a little later. That we are actually using today with a large international bank for a process called financial client onboarding. So I want to show you something that's quite tangible and being deployed today. But one point I wanted to make initially about this continuum is that when we began speaking with this bank, it's UBS, a Swiss bank, they brought a spectrum of processes to us that described their client onboarding procedures. So this is the client prospecting, the onboarding, the regulatory and compliance checks, and then everything related to the advisory services as structured processes. And we began to show them how we could introduce goals to bring in flexibility and reordering to the structure of their processes. And they then realized that actually their processes, as they'd encoded them, they weren't structured. And they could actually bring in more ad hoc and flexible flow mechanisms into the structure by adding these goals. And they then found that the encoding that we showed them, that you'll see later, fits the reality much better than the pure BPMN workflow that they had written down themselves. So the target here is to bring about a coherent approach to automating processes across the entire continuum. The argument is that to do this, we need to allow agility where it makes sense by constrained governance and control of how processes can evolve in real time. Our argument is that BPMN in its present form is not designed to manage governance and change across an entire value chain where you have different types of processes that may need to interact and control one another in hierarchies. And particularly when these value chains span across multiple concurrent processes that interact with one another and different process classes. We need to have some constrained, what we call process mutability, so the process is allowing them to change and evolve, but keep constraints on that. So, of course, you understand what they're going to do. You don't want them to randomly do surprising things. And allow coordination of concurrent processes at multiple levels of abstraction. So you've got the actual process instance. You've then got tactical control of that individual instance, strategic control across processes in an end-to-end chain inside an organization, and then potentially across supply networks and supply chains connecting companies together. So our proposal for this is to build an extension on BPMN that is executable, which we call goal-oriented BPMN, and it should be applicable to all process classes. So the goal hypothesis, what do we mean by this? Well, in all things, effectively, every action or action sequence has an intended outcome. Goals, in reality, define everything. People have goals, and this was a point that Paul Harmon was making in his presentation yesterday about trying to understand why people do the things they do and how to describe the things people do. Well, often what's neglected is the fact that people are trying to achieve some objective. So as an abstract representation, goals exist everywhere. People have them, tasks, projects. Projects have milestones, and you'll see milestone goals here. Organizations have goals, value chains and networks have goals. They exist everywhere. So the corollary here is that processes should have goals. Why not? It seems to fit the way that we see the world around us and interact with it. So a process goal represents some intended outcome for the process or some part of it. And this is an ideal alignment also with business execution. If you look at the way that Hoshin planning works, or even Lean and Six Sigma, the Hoshin planning in particular identifies goals that the business should try to achieve. Well, is there a way that we can bind and represent those goals down into the process automation layer so that you can satisfy the objectives of the business in the executive suite? So one thing we can look at here is the difference, what's a goal with respect to a rule. So without going into too much detail here, a rule is essentially a reactive thing. So it's an assessment of what to do next based on what's going on now. So if an event under certain conditions, then perform an action. One of the problems with this is it often lacks some structural mapping of the rule relationships. With goals, what you get is a little bit more. With goals, you can be a bit proactive. So you can have an assessment of what to do now, not just on the current state, but also the target future state, where you want the process to get to at a certain point, what you want it to achieve, or what performance measures and KPIs you want that process to maintain during its execution. Maybe with agility, changing the order in which you perform actions in order to meet those KPIs. So now we have a statement of given knowledge and events, select the best action to attain a goal, not just to perform the next action. This also offers a bit more structure, as you'll see with the example. You can have structural relationship between the goals. It's not just a goal that sits in a random space. You actually have the goals in hierarchies that connect to plans that contain BPMN logic. So we have a taxonomy of process goals. We have two goals, which is in the current model, to keep things simple to use. They encode why a process is doing what it is doing, or why a process is doing what it is, and what the process must or should achieve. And in this sense, they act as decision points to alter process flow in real time. So again, these are active entities, and you'll see later that every process instance that we execute inside our engine has a goal-oriented controller. And this is based on software agent technology, effectively, and has a decision loop inside it where this controller can set multiple goals and try to reorganize the plans and the business logic it has to achieve that goal. So the first type is a milestone goal. This defines the objective of a process by aligning intent, so what the process should achieve, with action, how it can go about achieving it. So it represents something to be achieved. For example, and here are some simple examples: to onboard a client within 24 hours, to assign a customer insurance claim, to retain load balance between multiple resources, to complete a bill of materials with procurement approval. So these are all things that should be achieved, either in a Boolean sense or maybe even with a percentage completion. Then we have governance goals. Governance goals are more flexible. So these are the things that help describe the mandate of a process to obtain or maintain some strategic performance target. So these run all the time. They're scoped to milestone goals, and they can do things like this. So they can help ensure that a computed process cost remains under threshold, maybe by reordering the order in which you execute processes, or moving from one track or one fast track to it, a normal track or fast track, which you'll see in the example. Ensure that the process executes in the shortest time possible. Ensure that the cheapest resources are used for low priority tasks. So again, you are making the process more aware of the context in which it is executing, and using events coming from that context, from the environment of execution, the business, and using that to alter the flow where it's possible at the decision points in the process to meet these goal criteria. And then the final point before showing you the tool is this allows you also, and I alluded to it before, have multiple levels of goal control, which you'll see. So you can have tactical governance, which would be on a specific executing process instance. But then, and this is one of the interesting things, you can start to use goals at layers above that. So you can have strategic governance that would span across multiple process instances. Maybe choosing which instance to accelerate in the way it's executing, prioritize one instance over another. It's particularly useful for case management. And then you can even put layers above this, which we actually have in the example, which spans an entire corporation that might have different groups of process instances for different tasks, but you can now actually prioritize and change the way in which these processes are executing by having oversight across an entire corporation or supply chain. Underneath everything, you have process activities. Now, we have this thing called a plan. This is the icon you'll see. And inside, you have BPMN. So at the bottom level, everything is BPMN2 compliant. But we wrap this BPMN in small chunks or snippets, as we call them, that can be selected for execution. So a lot about this structure is about how you can compartmentalize this BPMN into these plans. Right, so we'll look at this client onboarding from UBS. So I'm going to switch to the tool. So it's an Eclipse-based development environment. We believe unashamedly in the fact that true process engineering requires IT capability. And so, for example, for us, any executing process has to have a data model. I mean, you can't escape from it if you want to build a real software application. So we support things like data models. We also support things like form generation. This is part of the form modeler. But that's not what I want to show today. This is an example of a process for client onboarding. This is in use in a similar form to this at UBS Bank, and also we're working on a few new deals at the moment that big banks that will also start using this. The point or the way that you read this is you look at the top level goal. So here this is prospect handled. So what this effectively means, prospect handled, is when you have completed the process to take a prospect, someone that might be interested in opening an account with the bank, and converted that prospect into a new client. Underneath this, you have these milestone goals. So you have two types. These are the performance goals and milestone goals. This is just a representation of a milestone goal where you can see that the condition that allows that goal to become active. So you have goals here all on the same level, and behind this you have logic that says when these goals can execute. Perhaps they're in a sequential form, so this one before this one, before this one, before this one. This would be a standard sequential series of goals that must be achieved, similar to a Gantt chart in a sense. They're milestones that you want the process to achieve. But then each milestone goal can be scoped. And here, for example, you have the prospect is interested. So this means you've got a prospect, someone who you want to bring into the bank. He's a high wealth client. You want to keep that prospect persistently contacted with new information in order to encourage him to join. And so you've got a maintain goal here, a governance goal that is running continuously and checking when this person is receiving information and what the state is of attracting them into the bank. And so you have some other additional goals under here to ensure the prospect has been contacted personally, and then you have a method or a plan underneath to call or email that prospect. That's the logic where you're actually performing that function. And so this would be generating emails, it would be producing web forms or whatever. Or you can have a contact that's informed by the newest offers. You can here send a newsletter or send product literature. So here you have two methods by which you can satisfy that goal. And this is running continuously. Now, once you achieve prospect interested, that means basically that the prospect has finally capitulated and he wants to open an account with your bank. You go into this thing called contract signed. So I can double click on that and we go down to another level in the process hierarchy, and we look more deeply at the process. So we have contract signed. There are two paths to achieving contract signed. We can do normal track acquisition or fast track acquisition. I can go again deeper, normal track, and this is actually the primary. If you read across here, these are the primary goals, primary milestone steps to going through that prospecting process. So the client application's been processed, the contractual agreement's been reached, the client position analyzed, and so forth. And if you go down and look underneath here, you see classic BPMN, and this is the person of political exposure and anti-money laundering checks that you would normally experience. So, this basically is a process that will just execute from left to right, but you can, because goals can run concurrently, have these running out of order. You can change the order that they execute in, because if you've got something that's blocking, you can just say, okay, well, we'll wait for that to finish, but we'll allow these other concurrent goals to execute so the process continues to flow. You can also reorder. And this is all in the logic that describes these goal conditions. And that's basically hidden inside the encoding of the goal. And so if we go back to contract signed, we have this normal track, fast track. Fast track basically is a smaller set of those goal conditions that should be achieved to get that client on board. And this purple here basically is indicating that when you made a normal track shift over to fast track, so because of some condition, some goal that's saying we want to move this guy from a normal track to a fast track, you take the logic that's already been executed across into the fast track. So you don't lose anything. Everything, because here it's data-driven, all of that data points, those things that were achieved, are migrated across into this sub-process, and the process continues from that point. So let's look at things at a slightly higher level. Above this instance, you have things called tactical goals, and here you can do things like prospect contacted once per 14 days and 2 contacts or new prospects acquired from a prospect. And these are at a tactical level of control that will mandate some changes on the running instance to ensure that the prospect has been called at least once every 14 days. So it will send an alert to check whether this has been happening in the underlying instance. And again, it will send alerts or control the process in some way if these 2 contacts haven't been acquired by the time you get to a certain period after the prospect first registered an interest. And then we can go above that. So here we have, these are strategic business goals that sit across all of your current prospect cases. So these are all the people that you're trying to bring into the bank. So here we can do things like process 80% of applications within 5 days. And if this isn't happening, we can control it. And basically, if we drill down here, we can see there's a simple BPMN process that says, change the default system processing mode to fast track. And these are some of the things we can do at this level. So here we are effectively controlling, with a goal hierarchy, all of the individual processes, depending on, irrespective of what state they're running in, to push some of them into a different state by looking at the overall context of all of your running instances. Acquire 100 new clients every month, and if you're not doing that, then accelerate the amount of information you're sending out to your prospects in order to try and encourage them to join. Convert 50% of prospects into clients. If it's taking too long, then again, in here you can take remedial action to control and emphasize a route to accelerating those onboarding processes. And then even, again, above this, you can have corporate level goals. Now, these corporate level goals are things that span multiple processes, and here we have things like PEP, this politically exposed person, and US prospect referrals are processed within 15 days. So now what we're looking at is, if this system is being deployed into one division of UBS, let's say in this case in Mexico, US prospects that sign up in Mexico, they can't be processed there because US individuals they can only be processed into banks in the US. That's the new regulations. So that's a referral process. So you need to refer that individual to a US bank. But you can control that here and make sure that those referrals are taking place within 15 days, and then take action on the individual underlying processes to ensure that happens. And there are other things you can do here, regional prospect conversion rates above 40% within 12 months, and then you can have individual control points on the different regional parts of your business. So here we're really looking at the overall business structure of UBS and looking at adjustments on the basis of EMEA, of Asia Pacific, or Latin America. So this is what I wanted to say in terms of these multiple layers of strategic goals that can span across different levels of the end-to-end value chain. So going back to the presentation. So what's happening when you execute this is that the execution path through each process instance and across process instances is being guided, it's being dynamically constructed as a sequence of activities. So you're selecting plans, you're selecting activities according to the guidance that you're controlling at these multiple levels. So this is being done in response to situational context in an order that best fits the situation with concurrency when appropriate and proactively in anticipation of situational change. And all of this in order to meet the goal constraints that are specified in your process description. I'm going to skip this because of time. This emphasizes the point about the fact that you can use goals at individual processes, at intra-organizational processes. A final point I'd like to make is, I mentioned earlier on that, how do we do this? I should point out that you don't have to use the goals. This is an added extra. You can do standard BPMN the same as with any other BPMS. So this is something new, something that we're trying to push back the boundaries of what you can do with a BPMS and try and look at ways to get across that chasm that was referred to by thinking about connecting processes across an entire organization or value chain. And one of the mechanisms we're using here is this thing called a goal-seeking controller. This runs essentially each process instance. And the controller is effectively trying to satisfy goals by selecting available plans. This is a simple diagram that kind of shows how it works, but this is effectively something similar to a software agent where it has a sense act loop. You have a world model, so it's monitoring and understanding the information content of the execution context of the process it's controlling. You have a set of goals, and at the heart here, an action planner. So there's this interpreting the goals inside the process instance that agent is responsible for and determining the selection of plans that best fits those goals through the course of its execution. And then, of course, it executes those plans, and that completes the sense acts loop. So it's basically a proceed, decide, execute loop. Okay. Each instance is thus situation aware and capable of adapting process flow decisions according to context. Now this all sounds kind of, a bit out there, but the interesting thing is that we have customers that are believing this, that they can actually see tangible benefits when we recode some of their processes and introduce goals, and they begin to see ways in which they can reflect different control points and governance issues across their companies onto the underlying BPMN processes that they actually want to be executing. And some of the things we're working on next, we're working on extensions to this language. We're working on inter-process signaling using semantic events. This is something that we can also enable because of the software agent controllers, and also looking at improved planning and also learning algorithms. We're also interested in thinking about how these controllers can actually learn from the processing of events and use that in a way to improve processes through understanding how they're executing, and more than just doing analytics, but actually doing analytics in a way where the system itself can learn how to better conduct an execution plan the next time around. Thank you.